Hello my kings, queens, and fellow non-binary leaders, welcome back to Nerdy Nekama, today with the SUPERCUT of Hidden Chasms. I'm super excited for this one. It of course has bonus material as all my SUPERCUTs have, and yeah, I hope you will like it, enjoy the series, and now, let's go. Little hint before we start, as all of you know who have seen one or multiple parts of the series, this one comes with content warnings, so check these, they're in the description, and now, let's go. The key clicked in the lock. He pushed a door open with his shoulder with a sigh as he balanced the bags in his other hand. A string of curses slipped past his lips as he dropped the key and struggled to pick it up again. Come on. He groaned, kicking off his shoes and putting the bags down on the table with a thud. Atsumu? He fought his jacket off, turned to the bags again, and started to unpack the onigiri he brought, so his brother would finally eat something healthy. His eyes lingered on the packaging for a second. Old habits die hard. Atsumu, come on, I know you're home. I brought onigiri. He took a plate from the kitchen cabinet and started putting the onigiri from the packaging onto it and setting it amidst the table while waiting for an answer. A groan of protest that he woke Atsumu on his day off, or the sound of footsteps finding their way into the kitchen, drawn in by the lure of food. But nothing. His eyes narrowed, and the worried crease appeared between his brows that always returned when it was about his brother. He took a deep breath, trying to prepare himself to find the blonde on rock bottom again. A bad day. He hated seeing his twin like that. Hated everything that tore the other back down into the dark chasm he tried fighting himself out of ever since he was young. Atsumu. He lowered his hands and left the food in favor of walking down the hall toward the bedroom where he suspected Atsumu. Before he could reach it, the door opened 3 meters from him. A sense of relief washed over him as he was faced with the blonde. He looked tired, a little disheveled, but far from his worst. He was up and walking, a little pale, with soft rings under his eyes, but a sheepish smile on his lips. The relief was short-lived as he noticed a set of bruises on his neck. His pupils shrank, and his expression darkened. It only clicked that they were hickeys when a tall, slightly slumped figure appeared behind him, seemingly trying to merge with the wall next to him. His jaw locked as he was faced with the dark-haired ace, only half relieved as he recognized Sakusa. How long has this been going on? I don't know what you mean, Samu. I just... Don't play dumb, Atsumu. Why didn't you tell me? You know why. His arms crossed over his chest in what to most would look like a defensive gesture, but Atsumu saw where his nails dug into old, faint, washed-out scars on his upper arm. He was holding himself together. All the more reason. Does anyone know? Atsumu gulped and shook his head slightly. No. God, Atsumu! A nervous silence spread in the room. The dark eyes of the ace observed the setter closely, the way his hands tensed, his eyes flickered through the room and back to his brother, and the way he worked his lip between his teeth. He wished to take his hand to stop his nails from digging into his flesh, wished to touch his face and let his thumb caress over his mouth to free his lower lip from the clasp of his teeth, and soothingly hold him until the tension faded. His fingers twitched in his direction, but he pulled them back under Asumu's gaze. He had always assumed the twin was protective, but this exceeded his expectations. There was something accusing in Asumu's eyes, something hurting, the reminiscence of an old pain. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. He wasn't quite sure what he was apologizing for, just that the whole situation was a little overwhelming, and Atsumu looked like he wanted to behead him. His gaze pierced straight through him. Would you mind if I talk to my brother alone for a second? Samu, cut it out. It's not that serious. Not that serious. He took a deep breath to calm himself before turning around. Where are you going? Home. You obviously don't need me here. Wait. He tried setting after him. I brought you food. Eat it before it gets bad. He was already at the door, putting on his shoes. Samu! The blonde appeared behind him, but Atsumu didn't turn around, just hesitated. Are you safe right now? Sakusa had barely moved from his position by the bedroom door, but at that, his brows furrowed. What an odd question. He saw him here, right before him, or would have if he turned around, safe and sound in his apartment. So why would he... Yes. Atsumu gulped, slowly reaching for the door. Then we can talk about it later. That, and the fact that you apparently don't trust me with this. No, Samu, The door clicked shut. The silence falling over them weighed heavier this time. What was that about? His eyes were locked on the blonde's back as he slowly approached the setter, who still hadn't moved from the step that led to his door. He shook his head slightly. Sam was just protective. That's all. He knew it was a lie. Could practically taste it in the air, burdened with an unspoken quarrel between the siblings. But he could also see the way Atsumu crossed his arms again, his fingers curled around the fabric of his hoodie, tightly enough that Sakusa was sure it would have left marks on her skin had the material not separated them. Maybe it still did. But hey, if you brought food, no reason to waste it. He tried for a smile, but his voice was shaky and his lower lip still bore the mark of his teeth. Sakusa was sure if he'd let his tongue slit across like last night, he could feel where the delicate skin had dented under the force, could possibly even taste hints of blood where it broke. Whatever the reason behind the twins' odd behavior, it troubled Atsumu more than he tried to let on. Enough that his usually carefully maintained facade cracked. After a couple of weeks of their relationship and a much longer time being something like friends, if friends flirted one-sidedly and love-hated one another constantly, Sakusa prided himself on being able to distinguish Atsumu's fake smile from a real one. That, or maybe that in itself, was just a habit of his because people tended to be less careful around him. Few tried to impress him or appeal to him in a social situation. He was the outcast, the odd one out. As a result, the mask slipped, and Sakusa quickly learned the difference between someone being fine and pretending to be, between someone respecting another or just pretending to. That being said, most didn't seem practiced in the art of deception. It was enough to fool acquaintances in a world that appeared uncaring and shallow. They didn't have to be careful. Miya Atsumu was different, more difficult. Sakusa had fallen for his deception. The years they spent close in high school, the ace truly believed Miya Atsumu was the arrogant jerk he pretended to be. He could appreciate his skill and passion for volleyball as what it was, but he couldn't see beyond that. As the concept, the play that was Miya Atsumu slowly unraveled before his very eyes once they met again at MSBY, he didn't know what to be more shocked about. How blind he had been, or how well Atsumu managed to hide even back then. He had been wrong. He wasn't used to it, but with Miya Atsumu, he had been wrong over and over again. Miya wasn't reckless as he thought. In fact, he was more careful than anyone around him. A mask so carefully maintained that it didn't even slip when it was just Sakusa to see. The awkward outcast you didn't have to be careful around. To his credit, Atsumu had changed since high school. So did Sakusa. When meeting again, although it took months, Sakusa slowly understood what lay beneath. At least, he thought so. When he could differentiate between his honest, burning passion for the game and his put-on smile on bad days, after lost games or at interviews, he thought he had understood, that he had cracked the code Miya Atsumu, and surprisingly found that he couldn't help but fall in love with who he turned out to be. But evidently, he was wrong again. The image remained incomplete. Sakusa had the slight inkling that this was not a result of the middle school bullying or his abandonment issues due to his upbringing Atsumu had opened up to him about a couple of weeks ago. He had seen, even back then, that these things still burdened him, but it didn't compare to this. For a brief second, the blonde's gaze remained fixed on the door, and he looked utterly horrified. Days passed, and the matter slowly migrated to the back of Sakusa's mind. He couldn't forget about it. The brief moment of fear flashing over Atsumu's face was burned into his memory, but throughout the week, living out their daily lives without disturbances, it lost its relevance. Or rather, urgency. He still very much wanted to know what caused Atsumu's distress, if only to avoid it in the future at all costs. It was a riddle he failed to solve. After all, it surely couldn't just have been Atsumu. The younger Miya twin was nothing but a strong support for his older brother. Maybe a bit too protective at times, but Atsumu could always count on him, and he did. Sakusa remembered vaguely the one time the blonde had been missing from practice almost a week due to what he assumed must have been an ordinary sickness, a cold or something alike. At the time, they weren't close, though Sakusa would be lying if he said part of him didn't worry back then. One day before Atsumu returned, with a smile that was slightly forced to be brighter but genuine at its core nonetheless, the Raven met the younger twin on the hallway of their apartment complex. His expression was grim, and he carried what looked like a care package to his brother's door. At the time, Sakusa didn't bother asking what troubled the sitter. They hadn't been close enough. And yet, now he regretted it. Chances were that he wouldn't have gotten a genuine answer from the silver-haired at the time, or even today for that matter. But he still wished he had tried. This way, whatever reason caused Atsumu's distress both times remained unknown to him. For the last days he waited for Atsumu to bring it up, but he didn't. And so he didn't either. If the blonde wasn't ready to talk about it, it wasn't his place to ask. Though Sakusa couldn't claim it was easy, not knowing. If they had been together for longer, maybe, just maybe, he would have tried for an answer sooner. If he had known him better, could have read his signs and body language well enough to make sure the question wouldn't put him back into whatever that was, but he didn't. He thought he did, which was foolish and arrogant in retrospective. Some things only get revealed and accomplished through time, like knowing your partner's habits and very being like your own, better even perhaps. It almost scared him how much he wanted that for them. Perhaps that was why not knowing became his new, least favorite thing about the setter. The morning was fresh and foggy when Sakusa's heart fastened with a completely different kind of worry. He clung to his coffee mug and must have looked particularly murderous at the beverage because Atsumu noticed, and with his typical teasing smirk poked fun at him from afar, namely the couch he was draped over lazily. They had spent the night together at Sakusa's apartment this time, and Atsumu had visibly few troubles with feeling at home. Did the coffee murder your entire family, or it just failed its duty? Sakusa huffed in faint annoyance, though Atsumu wasn't completely wrong. He really didn't feel awake enough for this. No, it's nothing, babe. His grip tightened, and for a moment he didn't dare meet the golden eyes. There, he did it. 13 weeks, and he finally managed to use a pet name. He felt his face heat up and tried to... Why did he look like that? When he finally did dare meet Atsumu's gaze, the image was not what he expected. The golden eyes had widened, and for a moment, shock was written all over the blonde's features. Then he gulped, slowly, carefully. He blinked a couple of times before control returned to him, but still the expected reaction, teasing or anything alike, never came. At this point, he wanted anything but this. Atsumu was too quiet. What did she say? I said, wait, don't repeat it. The same tremor ran through his voice as that day. The same worried smile played on his lips as he tried to cover up his reaction, stopping the trembling of his lower lip by capturing it between his teeth as before. A frown sat on Sakusa's brows, and he slowly placed the mug aside. I thought you liked pet names. You always coo over it when characters use them in K-dramas or manga. A slight bitterness accompanied his words, and Sakusa internally chastised himself for it. He felt a little disappointed, betrayed that Atsumu didn't seem to appreciate the efforts it took him to work up the courage to say this. But that wasn't the setter's fault. He shouldn't have expected anything, or drawn conclusions from what the other enjoyed in fiction versus reality. Still, this was off the other end of the spectrum of expected reactions. I do. It's just... He nibbled at his lip again. His hands twisted into the fabric of his hoodie, and for a moment his eyes seemed to focus on something far away before he seemed to remember where he was, and with a flinch brought himself back to reality. It's tacky, don't you think? Completely overused. He tried playing for confidence and half leaned over the back of the couch while resting his face in his hand. His grin felt almost like an insult to Sakusa. He couldn't remember the last time he had been audience to Atsumu's fake smiles. Actually fake, not just amplified or camera ready. And it wasn't even convincing at that. Okay, what is going on? It didn't change, but Sakusa could see his expression harden. What do you mean? Don't play. He stopped himself as he noticed that Atsumu had used the same words before, and it hadn't gone well then either. He needed to stay calm. With a deep breath, he set down the coffee mug on the kitchen counter before leaning against it as he faced Atsumu. Atsu, something is wrong. At least be honest about that. I would be a pretty shitty boyfriend if I didn't notice that much after dating for 3 months. The golden eyes he loved so much didn't look at him anymore. They were focused on the fabric of the couch as though the pattern in which it was woven had suddenly sparked his interest. I want to help, or in the very least, not make you feel that way anymore. So, please, talk to me. It took all his willpower to stay where he was. He had the slight inkling that coming off forceful would have the opposite effect he desired. Still, it was hard to tolerate the sudden distance between them. Really empathetic, ain't I? A bitter chuckle escaped his lips, though it sounded slightly choked. Cold shivers haunted on Sakusa's spine at the words, but before he could reply and offer reassurance, Atsumu got up so suddenly Sakusa kept silence in surprise. I should get going. Sorry for that. Atsumu, wait. But the setter was already at the door, putting on his shoes. Shit. What happened? What had he done wrong? Atsumu? Sakusa reached out to him, but as soon as his fingers caressed his shoulder, the blonde flinched violently. He pulled his hand back as though he had burned himself and froze. His breathing was rigid as he tried to understand what was going on. He wished he didn't. He would have just let him go. When Atsumu turned around at the door, fear coined his expression. He tried to hide it, but his eyes betrayed him. Atsumu was scared. He was scared of him. For a moment, Sakusa forgot how to breathe, as the realization hit him like a truck. The setter was gone long before he could catch himself. Before he knew what was happening, a familiar itch spread through his skin and he rushed to the bathroom. His brain short-circuited, and he found himself vigorously washing his hands until they turned red in irritation. Only then could he force himself to stop. The itch was still there, just slightly more manageable after giving in to the urge. He knew he needed to calm himself before it escalated. Cleaning calmed him. His brain provided, causing a frustrated groan to escape his throat. His thoughts raced back to the therapy sessions he still attended regularly. He needed to remember the strategies he'd been taught. Slowly, by controlling his breathing and allowing minor, non-destructive tasks, he calmed. His hands were still painfully red, reminding him that his skin wouldn't forgive a slip-up so easily. And still, the itch was just under the surface, dangerously close. He needed to find a way to work through what happened today that wouldn't trigger him to spiral. If he could just manage to sort his thoughts and look at the facts, he might be able to understand or at least think about it without panicking. A list. He should make a list. Or write it down somehow. Automatically, his feet carried him to his bedroom and the desk in the corner next to the window. He found the paper, but when he lifted a pen to the blank surface, his hands started to tremble. He needed help. The door clicked open. The person didn't even bother ringing the doorbell or knocking, leaving only one possibility of who it was. Kyo? The voice of his cousin echoed through the flat as the door shut close behind him. Sakusa could hear him take off his shoes and the quiet steps as he searched the apartment for him. He probably should have answered, but his mouth felt dry. Mere seconds later, Komori appeared in the doorframe to his bedroom, his expression uncharacteristically mellow. Hey. Sakusa looked up from where he sat next to the bed. His whole posture was tense as he tried to keep his mind occupied. A small, compassionate smile spread on his cousin's face as he slowly entered the room and sat down beside him. He kept a comfortable distance between them, since he knew Sakusa needed it at the moment. So, what happened? He knew this wasn't just a relapse out of the blue. Komori was one of the few Sakusa allowed close to him, and as such, he knew him well. His cousin had accompanied him on his healing journey, every part of the way Sakusa allowed him to share. The raven tried to answer, but his throat felt like an invisible string was wrapping itself around it, and he couldn't find the words he needed. Suddenly his mind went blank. Well, his inner turmoil became an incoherent mess of entangled thoughts. It's about Atsumu, isn't it? He pressed his lips together and nodded. A sudden pressure built behind his eyes, but he knew that even if he wanted to, he couldn't cry now. Did you two fight? He shook his head and with a deep breath, straightened his back. No. I think I messed up. How? It took him a moment to respond. His eyes fixated on his fingers that were still red. A couple of cracks appeared where they started to dry out. He would have to... Suddenly, Komori got up and left. Sakusa observed him a little stunned, his gaze fixed on the door when he returned. In his hand, he held a small jar of ointment. The libero kneeled down in front of him and slowly freed his hands from where Sakusa had clasped them together. Wordlessly, he applied the medicine on his reddened skin. Sakusa could see the worry reflected in his eyes as his cousin took in the extent of his injuries. It made his heart squeeze with guilt. That he seemed to have a lot of lately. Atsumu was scared of me. What? Scared? Why scared? I don't know. I said something, called him babe, and he acted weird about it. Then when I asked, he left, and I tried to stop him, and he looked at me like he was terrified. Mote, am I becoming like my father? His voice almost broke toward the end, and his eyes were widened and filled with terror. What? No, Kyo, why would you even think that? The libero's eyes widened in utter shock, like he couldn't quite process what the other had just said. Sakusa let his head hang low and pulled his knees tighter again as he let his hands fall loosely on top of them. Okay, let's take this step by step, yes? He nodded weakly. First, you are not like your father. You will never be like him. He is an asshole. People have called me that before. His voice was somewhere between bitter and resigned. Not comparable. Kiyomi, I need you to listen to me. You are not him, and you will never be him. He nodded slowly. Years of therapy couldn't erase the fear completely, but it helped. In the very least, Komori's words sparked doubt in what he was previously willing to believe freely. But Atsumu, he was still scared. What if I made him scared? Well, that much was obvious. Just why? What had he done? What exactly happened? You said you called him babe, right? He cringed. Hearing it said like that was odd and uncomfortable. It had taken him all his strength to even consider addressing the other by a pet name in the first place, and now... I thought he would like it. He always seemed so fond of nicknames and shows, and, well... What did he say right after? Did he leave immediately, or... No. For a moment, he just froze, and then smiled and said that the pet name was Taki. But it looked wrong. I know he didn't like it. He looked shocked. I would be too, hearing you being all soft and cutesy. Moteo. He sounded annoyed, but part of him appreciated his cousin for trying to make light of the situation. I know, but if you ask me, what happened wasn't on you. Perhaps the nickname had some bad memories associated. An ugly breakup, or a crazy ex, or maybe he just really didn't like it. Either way, you couldn't know. But how do I fix it? Time. Sakusa looked at him in disbelief. I know it's not the most satisfying answer, but I doubt there's little more you can do right now. Atsumu probably needs some time to process this. You'll have to wait until he's ready to talk and just, not use that pet name again. Of course, that much he knew already. He never wanted to do anything that would cause the blonde harm. The pet name had long made it on the never to use list in his mind. He doubted he'd even use it if they broke up and he got with someone new. What if he breaks up with me? His heart clenched. It hurt. Simply thinking about the possibility hurt. Speaking the words felt like acid on his tongue. You know Atsumu better than I do, and even I know that he wouldn't break up with you over a simple misunderstanding. You haven't seen him. He was hurting. He was scared. Sakusa shrunk further as he pressed his knees closer to his chest and stared at the ground in utter disdain. Kyo, Tsumu's head over heels for you. One misstep won't suddenly change that. I don't know what demons lay in his past causing him to act that way, but I'm certain of this. Suddenly, Komori's phone lit up with a message, and as he read it, he let out a sigh of relief. The good news is that Atsumu's not alone. He just arrived at Samu's. His brother will take care of him, just like I take care of you, dear cousin. How do you know that? I just do, okay? Under any other circumstances, Sakusa would have commented on the sudden blush spreading on his cousin's cheeks with more than a raised eyebrow, but like this, he didn't feel like getting into more relationship drama. It's going to be alright, don't overthink it too much. You will only come up with much worse reasons than there actually are. Motsuya, he looked utterly terrified. He knew he was repeating himself, but he didn't know what else to do. Atsumu's expression, coined by fear, had rattled him to the bones. A simple Ganhwang breakup couldn't have invoked such a fear, could it? I know, but you don't know for sure why, and speculations make it worse. I know you, Kyo. You already have a list of the worst case scenarios in that pretty little head of yours, and it's probably not that bad. He wasn't sure he could agree with his cousin on that, but he had to admit defeat because Komori was right on at least one thing. All he could do right now was wait. Come on, time for some distraction. He let himself be pulled up by the libero and stood, if a little uncertain, on his feet. The smaller dragged him along to the living room and forced him to sit down. Pick any show or movie you like, I make us tea. No buts. He didn't even try. He knew that arguing with Komori like this was useless. Ultimately, they ended up watching a mediocre J-drama Sakusa wasn't all that interested in, but it was one of Atsumu's favorites. When he saw it, he couldn't scroll past it. Atsumu would be so mad when he found out that he finally cried at the scene the blonde always wept at, only for him not to be there when it happened. Yeah, I'm coming. Osamu stood up deliberately slowly upon hearing the frantic knocking on the door. His voice was laced with annoyance, an opinion his boyfriend shared wholeheartedly. Rin groaned as his pillow, aka Osamu, got up to open the door. They had shared a lazy morning followed by a lazy afternoon together, as neither of them had to work today, and they vowed to make this their resting day. Said resting day, aka home date night, was rudely interrupted by the unexpected guest trying to break in by hammering against their front door, from what it sounds like. He could already guess who it was by that reaction alone. What Osamu wasn't able to guess was the state his brother was in as he appeared before him. The blonde was out of breath and sweating as if he had run the whole way here. He had nothing on him but his phone and the clothes he wore. They weren't even fit for the weather. Not that Sumu was above wearing nothing but a t-shirt even in winter to flax, but this was different. He was frozen in place for a moment, taking in the state his brother was in with mild shock that quickly turned to anger as he saw his face. Atsumu looked distraught. What happened? Who did this? Atsumu flinched under his harsh tone, and Osamu internally scolded himself, but he wasn't apologetic for being angry on his twin's behalf. If whoever was responsible for this dared to cross his path, they'd feel sorry enough for the both of them. Samu, it's not... Come inside first, Atsumu. Suna had appeared behind him soundlessly, and now reached out a hand to offer Atsumu support and guided him inside as well. It was easy to forget with his laid-back attitude, but Suna could be really caring and concerned for the other. He gently supported his friend as they stepped inside, followed by the silver-haired twin. Do you want some tea? I was just about to make some. Well, that was an utter lie, but Osamu said nothing. In fact, his heart swelled with pride and affection for his partner as he saw him take care of his brother. Although it was always apparent that the two would be a package deal, many of his previous lovers hadn't been able to accept that, but Osamu never hesitated to put his brother first. It might not always be obvious, but he loved his idiot brother, and he would keep him from any harm if he could. He truly had been blind not to notice then sooner. He was his perfect match. Every day they shared seemed to prove that he knew, and as he watched him now, treating Atsumu with a gentle kindness he needed right now, while his eyes burned with the same rage Atsumu felt, he knew it to be true. What happened, Atsumu? It wasn't his fault, but... His words were incoherent and broken up by sniffles and hiccups, but what Atsumu understood caused a shadow to darken his face. He had heard similar things before, and he'd be damned if he ever let anything like that happen again. Atsumu, what did he do? And don't you dare downplay it if it was bad. He had calmed a little, or at least put up a calm front to make Atsumu feel more at ease. However, in his voice the anger vibrated. He couldn't keep his calm when it was about his brother. Other than him, Atsumu had calmed a lot since he had been handed the cup of tea he held onto tightly now. Though now, instead of being frantic and filled with panic, he seemed pretty out of it. He didn't even notice that despite what Suna said, the middle blocker hadn't gotten a cup of tea for himself or Atsumu. I know how this sounds, but it really wasn't his fault. He nipped at his cup and didn't even flinch when his lips connected with the way too hot liquid, just lowered it again. His eyes were trained on something in the distance, invisible to Suna and Atsumu. Can you tell us what happened then, so that we understand? Suna had more control over his reaction than the silver-haired. He didn't let his impatience and anger taint his voice, though Atsumu could see his hands twitch, a telltale sign that the other was on the brim of bursting. He wanted answers just as badly as Atsumu did. No wonder. Atsumu wasn't just his brother, but also Suna's best friend. He had to witness what happened to him when he was still with Yoshida the same way Atsumu did. They helped Atsumu pick up the shards after everything that happened. Atsumu's world had broken apart, and they couldn't help but get cut while helping him puzzle it back together. He used a bad name. Well, that was frustratingly vague. Atsumu clenched his fists tightly not to let his impatience show. I thought you would like that. He always complained that he isn't romantic enough. You knew about them? Atsumu had only recently learned about their relationship, but Suna made it sound like he had been aware for months. The taller shrugged his shoulders. Yeah, and I mean, it's not like Atsumu hadn't had a crush on him since forever. Why didn't you tell me? Suna threw a sharp glance in his direction, akin to a silent warning. You can get intense about Atsumu's relationships. For good reasons, I know. He shut him down before he could even start. But that considered, I thought it was best for Atsumu to tell you himself. And I didn't think Sakusa was a bad guy. His attention turned back to the blonde. I would have said something if I deemed Atsumu in any danger from him. I wasn't. He is a good guy. Ami didn't do anything wrong, I just overreacted. He stared into his cup, close to tears again. His body started to tremble, and it was as if he searched for something to hold on to. God, what if he hates me now? Or thinks that I'm a crybaby? He already knew that. It's not exactly a secret that you can be dramatic. He wouldn't date you if that was a deal breaker for him. Atsumu huffed, and the tension keeping him rigidly in place eased ever so slightly. So, he called you a pet name. And then what? He hated this. He hated not knowing what hurt him. He hated not being able to do something about it. Nothing. I just ran out. He tried to stop me, but I didn't let him. Why? It was a name he used. He didn't need to add anything more, any context. Both Suna and Osamu knew exactly who he was. Osamu's expression grew even darker, and the rage burned in his eyes again. I'm sorry. This is stupid. I know it is. This is not stupid. Damn it, Sumu. He hurt you. Traumatized you. You are allowed to hurt. Your reaction is valid. Stop apologizing for it. He knew that he was a hypocrite, that the apology too was a reaction to what that asshole had drilled into him, but he needed his brother to understand this. Part of him wished Sakusa would have done something, just so he could do something about it. Instead, he was back to feeling helpless. This wasn't exactly something he could fix by beating someone up, though he would love to get his hands on Yoshida again. Sam was right. Your reaction is perfectly natural. The whole thing ended not even 2 years ago. You need to give yourself time to heal. I'm sure Sakusa will understand if you told him. I don't think I can do that. There's no rush. Just explain to him that there is a reason, but that you will need time. Atsumu nodded slowly, fumbling nervously with his hands again. Well, that can wait. You're staying with us for now. At least until you feel better. I don't care about what you should or shouldn't. It would help you, wouldn't it? Atsumu looked up at him, his eyes glossy, and he nodded. There was a silent pleading in the gold brown, and Osamu's heart clenched. Then you'll stay here. Rest and let us take care of you. Call out of work tomorrow and tell them you need a mental health day. He nodded once more and lowered his head again. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to burst in like this. Suna sighed, got up, and after confirming that it was okay, pulled Atsumu in a gentle hug. None of that. You can always come to us if you need to be somewhere safe, or need our support. You know that, right? Usually, Suna was never this gentle with the blonde, which just showed the gravity of the situation, but Osamu loved him for it, and he knew that Atsumu too appreciated it. His voice was gone, but he nodded. See? Let's get you settled in. Do you want my help? Atsumu shook his head and got up. His feet carried him automatically to the guest bedroom where he still had some stuff of his own. Ever since the events with Yoshida, they kept a care package for him there, including a plushie Atsumu sought comfort in when at his most vulnerable. I'll make some onigiri. He knew that it was far from the time for lunch, but making food calmed him. It was familiar. In this way he could feel like he took care of his brother the way he should. Atsumu? They exchanged one look and then understood. His gaze melted into something softer and he hugged him briefly before letting go again. You're doing good. I know this is hard for you. It is hard for all of us. He nodded. What do you think Sakusa is doing right now? I don't know, but he better be worried about Atsumu if he truly cares. Suna chuckled a little and glanced at his phone. I better tell Toya to check up on him just in case. Let's be honest, neither of them is what can be called functional. In that way, they are perfect for each other. Atsumu rolled his eyes when Suna typed the message. Chat between Motoya and Tsunaden. Hi, Atsumu just arrived here. He and Sakusa seem to have somewhat of a disagreement. Can you check on him? Already here. It was bad. Do you know what happened? Somewhat. The pet name? Yeah. Do you know why? I do, but I don't think I should tell you just yet. It's very personal to Atsumu. Though it really doesn't seem to be Sakusa's fault at all. Atsumu wasn't mad at him. Oh, good. And I understand. I'll tell Kiyo not to worry so much. Thanks for telling me. Love you. Love you too. Motoya's with Sakusa already. It doesn't seem he's taking it too well. Serves him right for making Sumu cry. Oh, come on. Don't be so hard on him. Or at least do it silently. Just be happy that he cares and try not to chase him away the next time you see him. For Tsumu's sake. He rolled his eyes again but nodded. Fine, he'll get a pass. I'm not convinced of this yet, but if he makes amends and makes Atsumu happy, I'll keep my peace. Suna grinned and got up to kiss him on the cheek. That's all I'm asking. Don't forget that he's our dear Toya's cousin, and he cares about him just as much as you care about Atsumu. You wouldn't want to make Motoya sad, would you? You're not being fair, you know. Just honest. Atsumu snuck his arms around him and kissed him softly to silence him. I already said I'll be nice. What more do you want? I could think of a thing or two. Not in front of me. You two were disgusting. Atsumu gagged as he walked back in, which only made Atsumu kiss Suna again to take off his brother. Suna giggled as they separated, before letting Atsumu focus on the onigiri and turning his attention to Atsumu. I just texted Komori. He's with Sakusa making sure everything's alright. Atsumu narrowed his eyes in suspicion. Why are you texting with Komori? He's my teammate. Atsumu kept staring at him, causing Suna to roll his eyes and sigh. Don't make it weird. How about, thank you for checking up on my lover? Ew, don't call him that. He scrunched his nose. Yeah, don't call him that. He'll have to earn it. You shut up! Within seconds, it was back to the usual bickering, with Suna getting some nice photos for his collection. He bet Toya would love these. He smiled to himself, thinking of the libero. Atsumu could hardly complain about Atsumu keeping Ami's secret for 3 months. They hid Motoya for twice that long. But of course, Suna would have his back in this. Atsumu spent the weekend with his brother and Suna. It was pleasant. For the following 2 days, he allowed himself to banish any thoughts of the past and worries concerning the future from his mind. It only came back to him briefly when he received a message from Sakusa on Saturday that read, "Forgive me for being so careless. Take your time. We can talk when you come home." He took a shaky breath after reading it. The setter had half a mind to go on a tirade for Sakusa taking fault when he shouldn't, but the small flames of anger that arose from him taking blame that he shouldn't were suffocated by the dreadful reminder of what happened. He didn't have the strength yet to go back to his old self, scolding his boyfriend for being unkind to himself. Instead, he settled for replying with a simple "okay," hoping that it would ease his worries at least a little bit. He knew it was far from enough, but the thought of talking everything through made him shudder. He doubted that he would be able to do that, so he banished it from his mind. For the following 2 days, he just focused on eating his brother into bankruptcy, playing video games with Suna and arguing about volleyball, as well as feeding the middle blocker with blackmail material whenever he and Atsumu started bickering. He also noticed time and time again Suna smiling softly at his phone, occasionally showing the messages to Atsumu but never Atsumu, which was very suspicious in his humble opinion. He pouted whenever they'd exclude him like that, earning himself his twins' teasing. All in all, the time spent away went well. He managed to recover, only overcome by dread once more when he prepared for practice on Monday. He felt bad that he hadn't contacted Sakusa throughout the whole time, aside from a one-worded message, and now they'd have to pretend that all was fine. In his nervousness, Atsumu arrived too early by far. He was out of the changing rooms before anyone else had even entered and opted to start with some warm-ups and stretches. Soon, Shoyo joined him and they practiced some serves before moving on to spikes. Sakusa entered shortly after, his expression grim and his gaze focused on the ground. He clenched his water bottle tightly enough for Atsumu to worry about the sturdy material. "Hey, Tsumu, do you know what's going on with Amikun today?" Hinata tried and as usually failed to be quiet. The spiker's head snapped up and within seconds the dark, black eyes had found his. For a moment, time appeared frozen as Atsumu took in the emotions flashing over Sakusa's face. There was surprise, turned into worry. Guilt reflecting in the deep ink-colored pools, and longing. His lips parted like he wanted to say something, one hand hovering in the air half extended toward him as though he was reaching out to Atsumu, but didn't quite commit to the action. He looked so lost, it broke the setter's heart. That apparently didn't communicate on his face though, because Sakusa lowered his hand and gazed again, as though he decided against it. "Did something happen between—" "Excuse me for a moment." He handed the volleyball over to Hinata and closed the distance to Sakusa with determined steps. This was still his boyfriend. His boyfriend who did nothing wrong and didn't deserve to suffer because Atsumu had some trust issues. "Hey." He approached him hesitantly and tried for his typical bright smile, though he didn't need to see it in Sakusa's eyes to know that it was off. "How are you feeling?" Upon closer inspection, Sakusa had dark circles under his eyes and looked pale, even by his standards. When Sakusa's eyes wandered lower, because he didn't want to be faced with his concern again, he noticed how red his hands appeared. The skin had cracked in some places and a few small band-aids were wrapped around his fingers. Immediately guilt overcame him and he looked away. Shouldn't I ask you that? I guess. They stood in awkward silence for a moment, only interrupted as more and more of their teammates filled the hall. Atsumu took a deep breath. I'm sorry about what happened. Judging by the way Sakusa's eyes narrowed, this wasn't the reply he wanted. Atsumu sighed, but he knew this wouldn't be that easy. He for sure would have more questions if their roles were reversed. After practice, come over to my place. For tea, and then we can talk. He offered a small smile and Sakusa nodded slowly, straightening his back and giving him a wary smile. He looked like he wanted to say something else, but by the time he opened his mouth to speak, the words Mion already called for them for official warm-ups. Later. Sakusa agreed. Atsumu was nervous. That might be an understatement. They walked home together after practice, yet not a word was exchanged. The silence weighed heavy between them. Their relationship was still so new that upon being met with a quiet, he feared this might be too heavy a burden to carry together this early on. He feared this would break them apart. The thought alone is almost scarier than confessing to his past and explaining his reaction from a couple days prior. However, when they stepped inside and Atsumu started the tea he had promised his ace, one look was enough to realize there was no reason to worry. Sakusa automatically went to the cupboards and picked Atsumu's favorite cup if he sought comfort, as well as the one the setter gifted them for their 2 weeks anniversary. At the time, Sakusa just rolled his eyes and said nobody celebrated that, but smiled to himself as he took a sip from his newly acquired cup. And he thought Atsumu wouldn't see it, but he did. That, and so much more, all the little gestures Sakusa attempted to hide. They were casual, easy, like there was nothing more effortless to him than incorporating Atsumu into his routines. He knew that it wasn't, but somehow the spiker made it look like the most natural thing in the world to simply know. Just now, he pulled Atsumu's favorite tea, which actually varied a lot depending on circumstances, from a drawer. It coaxed the setter to smile. Somehow, this was all he needed to know, that they would be fine. Thank you. What for? He still didn't quite meet his gaze and instead started to fumble with the string attached to the tea bags. Just being you, and being here with me, for me. The Raven gulped, his shoulders tensed. I seem to have messed that up a lot recently. Atsumu took a deep breath. He knew he couldn't avoid the topic, but part of him wished they could just forget about it and move on. He motioned for them to sit down at the table as he took the now filled cups into his hands. Sakusa followed his example. He pushed the ace's cup over to the taller and sat down opposite him. For a moment, they both simply watched the steam rising from the cups as the water changed color. It was as if Atsumu was tongue-tied, while Sakusa was too scared to say the wrong thing again. What happened that day wasn't your fault. You said that before. Not to him directly, but yes, he did. And I mean it. You couldn't know.
Couldn't know what? I don't understand what happened.
Sakusa tried to keep his voice leveled and calm for Atsumu's sake, undoubtedly. He didn't want to pressure him, but there was a certain urgency underlining it, a plea to make sense of everything. Sakusa hated being kept in the dark. To be honest, I'm not sure I can tell you quite yet. The spiker tried not to let his disappointment show, but Atsumu picked up on it regardless. It's not that I don't trust you.
It's okay if you don't. We haven't been close for long.
Cold shivers ran down Atsumu's spine as he saw the reflection of an old pain in the dark eyes. This was how he saw himself, and the blonde hated it. When he noticed him fidgeting with his band-aids, he quickly reached over the table and held his hands to stop him and make him look up. No, Kiyomi, look at me. I trust you. I trust you a lot, and I wouldn't lie about that or say it if I wasn't sincere. Sakusa's eyes widened a fraction, and this time it was Atsumu who averted his gaze first as he continued. The reason behind it, close to no one knows. Only Samu and Suna, because they were there when it happened, and Ma. I can't really talk about it just yet.
It was recent then?
He nodded slowly, struggling to swallow properly. Not as in the past couple of months, or even half a year, but yes, fairly recent. He took a shaky breath to calm himself and felt his tension ease as Sakusa gave him a reassuring squeeze. He smiled a little wobbly, but genuine nonetheless.
I understand, but Atsumu, I just want to make sure I'll never hurt you like that again. You'll have to tell me. I couldn't forgive myself if I did.
I already told you, it's not your fault.
Still. So I'll just never use pet names again.
At that, he laughed. Nuh-uh. Don't think you're getting out of being romantic so easily. He grinned a bit more steadily. A small chuckle escaped Sakusa's lips as well. A huge burden seemed to have been lifted from his shoulders as the setter started behaving like himself again.
Okay, so just not that one. Any other? Or anything else I shouldn't do?
Nah, as long as you don't hit me, all is good. The moments the words left his mouth, he knew he had said too much. Sakusa froze. He stared at him in utter shock and seemed to struggle to comprehend his words. It was meant as a joke, but Atsumu knew himself that he was only half joking. And for someone knowing him as well as Sakusa apparently did, to the point he knew which tea he preferred when, it showed.
Forget I said that. Atsumu, I would never...
I know. He was quick to grab his hand tighter, but his gaze was fixated on the table. I know you would never. Please, just forget it. He half expected more questions. How could he escape this after letting that slip? His stomach dropped as he heard Sakusa getting up and felt his hands retreat. He noticed how broken Atsumu was and didn't want to stay any longer. He felt a familiar pressure assembling behind his eyes. He had suppressed the entire time, trying to gain distance from the things forcing him to his knees. When he felt a hand on his back, he flinched, but immediately regretted it when he realized it was Sakusa. To make up for it, he tugged at his sleeve, pulling him closer and signaling that it was okay. After assuring himself of the setter's consent, Sakusa wrapped his arms around him gently and rubbed soothing circles into his back.
It's okay. You don't have to explain, and I'll do everything to make you feel safe around me. No one will hurt you as long as you're with me. Least of all, me.
A sob escaped his throat and Atsumu clung to him more tightly.
If I ever slip up like that again, just tell me, beloved.
A wet chuckle resonated in Atsumu's chest at the new pet name. He loved it. He reached up to kiss the soft spot beneath his jaw and could feel it warm as Sakusa blushed excessively.
You still get so flustered when showing affection. It's cute.
He snuggled closer, choosing to ignore Sakusa's barely believable huff of protest.
Atsumu yawned. His hand flew up to his mouth automatically despite wearing a mask. He shook himself, trying desperately to get the feeling back into his limbs and be more awake. Yesterday's training was brutal, and today gave him the rest. But in all of that, of course, they had forgotten to go grocery shopping. So here he was, at the end of a too long day, because his boyfriend could not be convinced to simply order takeout. Great. But at least Sakusa would do the cooking, so he guessed it was kinda fair that he forced him to go out to get the food. He would probably also clean the kitchen while he went shopping. Sakusa did that almost before every meal. Atsumu had observed him doing that more and more since he spent more time over at his apartment. Most of the time, there wasn't much to do since Sakusa cleaned it so frequently, but the ace always found something he wasn't quite satisfied with. A small smile tugged at his lips beneath the mask as he imagined the concentrated frown on Sakusa's face when he inspected an already beyond clean surface. He didn't like it when it overwhelmed his boyfriend to the point it caused him distress, but seeing his laser focus on daily chores was endearing. Atsumu was so distracted by his daydreams that he almost missed the aisle with ramen he was supposed to get. He leaned onto his cart for support while browsing it for the kind and brand Sakusa liked. The letters seemed almost to dance before his eyes mockingly, and squinting and rubbing them only did so much. He was about to complain to no one in particular when suddenly a voice rang through the aisle that made his blood freeze in his veins. For a second, everything came back to him. Months, years of unwanted memories flashed before his inner eye at once, unfiltered and barely recognizable. But while he couldn't pick out a single event in the mess of colors and sounds, they all had one thing in common. He picked up on easily. A nerve-wracking, piercing fear that filled his veins, bore into his bones and the very core of his being. He knew this fear, and he knew it well. He had been conditioned to know it and to associate it with one person alone. Babe, come on. You know this isn't fair. That sentence was one he was all too familiar with. Empty pleadings, guilt-tripping, gaslighting. That man encompassed it all, and Atsumu suddenly couldn't breathe anymore. How did he find him? How? His legs started trembling and he remained frozen in front of the shelf, not daring to turn around and face him. In his mind, a caricature of the man behind him played on repeat, laughing at his misery in one scene while apologizing for it in the next, pleading Atsumu should stop making him so angry. The setter couldn't breathe. He couldn't see. The shelf before him had completely given away to the memories, and he expected his touch any moment now, forcing him to turn around and face him. Of course, he was a public figure. Of course he could be found, but why here? He was supposed to be safe. It was just a random store, not the gym hall where his team would have his back. Not the onigiri Miya where Atsumu wouldn't let anyone, least of all Yoshida, get close to him if he asked. He felt bile rising up in his throat as he fought to stand upright. He could barely feel his legs at this point, could barely make out the sounds around him. He clung with desperate strength to the cart, waiting for all his nightmares to replace reality when he would approach him. Why didn't he approach him? He felt his heart drumming like a hummingbird in his chest, his blood pumping through his veins so rapidly he could barely hear anything else. His breathing alternated between uncontrolled gasps for air and trying desperately to hold his breath, to be quiet, not to draw any attention. But that must have been in vain. He had seen Atsumu, hadn't he? Why wasn't he approaching? What sick type of game had he been roped into? Did he really know how to play Atsumu like a fiddle even after all this time? Hadn't this never gotten better at all? He felt the despair slowly overtaking his thinking, and just wanted it to end. To crumble and lay down in a corner, to finally get it over with when... The steps left. Suddenly, his head snapped up, just in time to see Yoshida exit the aisle. He was on the phone. He hadn't talked with Atsumu. He hadn't noticed him at all. A sob clawed its way from his throat, and immediately he clasped his hands over his mouth to prevent any more noises from escaping. He slowly stumbled backward, cart long forgotten, his eyes fixated on where Yoshida had left. He couldn't breathe. The mask wasn't helping, but maybe, just maybe, it saved him. Yoshida probably didn't recognize him with the mask and under the hoodie. He clung to it, and after a few painful seconds turned around and ran. He couldn't feel his legs. His lungs burned, and upon leaving the store he stumbled into things more than once, but he didn't care. He ran. He couldn't stop running, even when his heart felt like it would explode. He couldn't stop running when it felt like he was coughing his lungs out. He didn't take off his mask, even as his breathing got more and more labored. He couldn't. If there was even the slightest chance that the mask kept Yoshida from recognizing him, he'd wear it as long as possible. He couldn't feel anything but pain. His vision blurred and he bumped into people more often than not. On the street to their apartment complex, he almost got hit by a car, but he didn't have time to even start to process that. It was only when the sound of the door locking behind him echoed through the hallway that he let his body give into the exhaustion and pain. He collapsed right by the door, curling himself up into a ball and pressing himself as close to the wall as possible. His heartbeat and breath combined into a wild symphony out of rhythm and hectic. Atsumu? It felt like getting punched in the face. The voice didn't sound like Sakusa's, and suddenly he wasn't in the ace's apartment anymore. This one was far more familiar, and far more like the horrors in his mind. No, he couldn't be back here. How? He couldn't breathe as he watched the shadowy figure approaching. He cried and tried to tear his gaze away, but he couldn't. The images flickered before him between Sakusa's tidy apartment and the hell he had lived in before. He tried pressing himself impossibly closer to the wall and away from whatever was coming for him. No, he was supposed to be safe. He was supposed to be home. Why didn't he run home? Atsu, what is happening? How can I help? Sakusa's voice was calm, forcibly so. For just a second, the image before him flickered and the flashback gave way to his very real, very concerned boyfriend. He did run home. He was home. Atsumu gulped, forcing his eyes to shut to compose himself just long enough to communicate. Flashback. He couldn't. He didn't know how to explain. He never told Sakusa what happened or how to deal with him when he got like this. He needed something to ground him, but Sakusa probably wouldn't even touch him with a stick like this, drenched in sweat and shivering like a leaf. Okay. Okay. It isn't real. You are safe. Sakusa took a deep breath to steady himself, encouraging Atsumu to do the same. The Sith had tried following his example, but was time and time again startled by shadows moving in his peripheral vision, memories he didn't wish to put a name to. It felt like he couldn't breathe no matter how hard he tried. Atsu, just listen to me, nothing else. I'm right here. I'm not going to hurt you. Another series of deep breaths, but it still didn't. He couldn't. Atsumu cried out in desperation, his heart hammering in his chest as he tried and failed to focus on his boyfriend. It hurt. Seeing the image of him fused with the one of Yoshida hurt so much. He couldn't. It's okay. Can I touch you? He kneeled before him at an arm's length. Part of him reacted to the request with fear, panic. The simple thought of touch could send him into a frenzy, but there was a difference. A difference he clung to desperately. Yoshida never asked. Atsumu nodded frantically, and as much as he could, stretched out a hand for Sakusa to grasp. He did. At first, his touch burned. Atsumu's brain easily provided the pain he expected, but when Sakusa squeezed it, it was gentle, not painful. His touch was warm and soothing, not forceful as the memory. Slowly, the illusion gave way to reality. Everything was blurry, and the shadow still taunted him, but the image of his boyfriend before him became more clear. He focused on him, and nothing else, just like Sakusa asked, and just like that, his breathing slowly calmed. His eyes were strained, and he didn't notice he was crying rivers until he had mostly calmed and his ragged gasps for air turned into quiet sobs and hiccups. The relief didn't settle in until the last shadow stopped flickering and stretching its tendrils out to him. Slowly, very slowly, he collapsed against the wall, his muscles giving out on him. He felt thoroughly exhausted, more than any practice could ever invoke. He still couldn't breathe properly, but when Sakusa reached out to remove the mask, he flinched away. It's okay. I'll just remove the mask. I will not hurt you. This is just so you can breathe better. Atsumu knew that. Sakusa wouldn't hurt him. Now that he could finally see him again without his vision being obstructed by memories, he wasn't scared of him anymore. He knew he was safe. But losing the mask after it saved him... He suddenly understood Sakusa's need to cling to one in public a lot better, even though it was for different reasons. Reluctantly, he nodded again and let the ace remove the piece. It helped. He could breathe again. His heart stopped when he saw the hurt flashing over Kiyomi's face as he took in his state. The full extent of his breakdown. He must look disgusting. Atsumu gulped, battling a new wave of tears. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Shh. It's okay. You're safe. There's nothing you'd need to apologize for. Sakusa got up and Atsumu's heart sank. However, it took mere seconds until he reappeared. The mask had been discarded, and instead Sakusa was carrying a damp, cool cloth he used to gently dab his forehead and neck and clean his face from the snot and tears. Here you go. It's alright. You're safe. Atsumu had not yet found his voice again to tell him that he could do that himself, and not a lie. And that Sakusa didn't need to make himself uncomfortable when he was already pulled to his feet. He was a bit unsteady, but without regard to his still sweat-drenched clothes, Sakusa made him lean on him and supported Atsumu until they reached the bathroom. I'm sorry, but I have to... and you... He set Atsumu down on the edge of the bathtub, struggling to string the words together he wanted, but Atsumu already knew. He knew Sakusa tried to stay strong for him, but he needed to shower and that Atsumu got tidied up as well. He didn't even expect him to last this long. The setter nodded slowly and tried to free himself of his shirt. I'm really sorry, Atsumu. I should take care of you out and foremost, but you did. His voice was raspy and quiet, and the reassuring smile he tried to give Sakusa felt miserably, but he meant it. Sakusa had put his needs last for him. I can wait with the shower until you're done with the bath. Atsumu shook his head. He saw how uncomfortable his boyfriend was already. They had seen each other naked plenty of times. What difference would it make? Turns out, a huge one. As soon as he sat in the bath, he wished he had accepted Sakusa's offer. He felt so vulnerable, so out in the open and bare, like anyone could hurt him any minute. A few seconds of tension waiting for Sakusa to enter the shower and telling himself that it would be fine, that he was safe. He couldn't bear it anymore. He washed up quickly, but as thoroughly as he could, cleansed his hair and jumped out of the tub again. He couldn't do this. As quickly as possible, he dried himself off and put on clothes, his paranoia growing with every passing second until he was seated on the couch again, waiting. He was still anxious, but the familiar environment helped. He was home. Atsumu? By the time Sakusa stepped into the living room, Atsumu had plenty of time to chew on his nails and make up one worst-case scenario after the next about the spiker's reaction. Kiyomi, I'm so sorry. I thought I could handle it, but I felt so exposed. I couldn't. If you need me to shower again, I will. I'm sorry. Atsu, calm down. It's alright. Why didn't you say so? I thought I could. Really. I swear, I thought it would be fine. I promise I'm not lying. I know that you're not lying. Don't worry. It's alright. He closed the distance between them slowly and sat down an arm's length away from the setter. You looked so uncomfortable, and I didn't want. I really thought it. Atsu, it is alright. He took Atsumu's hand again, giving it the same gentle reassuring squeeze as before. The ace took a deep breath in, and Atsumu copied him until he felt the panic ebb away again. See, everything is fine. I don't know what happened, but you are safe now. Atsumu gulped around the sudden lump in his throat, but instead of managing to say what he intended to, fell forward and let himself be pulled into Sakusa's arms. The ace held him until he was able to stay put together by himself. Unwilling to let go of his sole source of comfort, however, Atsumu simply settled for resting his head on Sakusa's lap and letting the raven play with his hair while he ordered food for them. He didn't even know what it was until he heard the door unlock. For a brief moment, panic pumped through his veins once more, but Sakusa, upon realizing the sudden tension in his muscles, immediately reassured him. Don't worry, it's just Motoya. And Atsumu, someone had to make the food after all. Sakusa rolled his eyes at that, and hadn't Atsumu been so utterly exhausted, he would have tried for more than a small smile now adoring his lips. It brightened a little as his brother came into view and placed his favorite food on the coffee table. You're good? I don't know. Atsumu acknowledged it with a small nod and knelt down beside the couch to get a better look at his brother. Yeah? 'Cause you look like shit, dear brother. I hate you too, Samuel. The other chuckled and reached out to ruffle through his hair, but then thought better of it and pulled back. The small, genuine smile was replaced by worry and a frown. What happened? Your panic attacks again? Atsumu shook his head slightly, trying to build up the courage to talk. He's safe here. There's nothing he'd have to worry about, He said something about flashbacks. A small sound like from a wounded animal echoed behind them. Probably from a Komori. The libero was too empathetic for his own good. But even Atsumu flinched, his face twisting. He turned to the blonde again, a serious expression on his face. Why now? What triggered it? Are you sure this is the right moment? Sakusa tightened his hold on Atsumu, visibly so frightened from what had transpired. Atsumu looked at him as if he wanted to object, but then nodded. Atsumu, however, couldn't bear the dejected expression on his face, and he really wanted to tell him. Atsumu could keep him safe. He needed him to know. He was there. At the grocery store. He was there. Atsumu began to tremble again, keeping his eyes averted when suddenly the memories of a few hours prior crashed back forcefully. Sakusa looked at him confused while Asumu's eyes filled with absolute murderous intent. The ace's eyes widened and he stared at the younger twin in shock. What did he do anything? I swear if he even so much as looked at you, I'll... Atsumu shook his head weakly, hiding against Sakusa again. He didn't recognize me. I was wearing a mask and a hoodie. I ran before he got the chance. It cost him all he had to get the words out coherently. He had to gasp for air and took a shuddered breath in after he finished. I swear I'll end him. How dare he even... He shouldn't even be here. How dare he... Samu, please. Can you please just keep me safe? He looked at him through glassy eyes and saw the pain reflected in his brother's. Pain that desperately searched for a target. But he relented, this time ruffling his hair softly before getting up. Okay, but if I see him, he's dead. You got it from here, Sakusa? Perplexed, the ace tried to follow the exchange between the siblings, but at that, he nodded determined. He wasn't sure when Atsumu had started trusting him with Atsumu's well-being, but something about the satyr clinging to him so desperately for support must have convinced him, because he left with Motoya shortly after, to Sakusa's shock. I love you, Kiyomi. Please don't leave. Never. He didn't understand what was going on yet, but he was certain it was bad. If he had previously thought that Atsumu might just be a bit too protective, after seeing Atsumu like that, he was certain the silver-haired had good reason to be. And he would gladly help him put whoever did this to him in their place, 6 feet under to be precise. His name was Yoshida. Sakusa looked up surprised. They had snuggled up in bed together after eating and waiting for Atsumu to calm down, but evidently neither of them found sleep. He sat up and turned on the lamp on his nightstand. When his gaze fell on Atsumu, he gulped. The setter's eyes were unfocused, as though they were looking at something in the far, far distance Sakusa was unable to see. He had theories about who this Yoshida guy was, theories that became more elaborate and uglier with every crumb of information he was given. You mean the guy you saw at the store today? His tone was careful. He saw what it did to Atsumu. The simple image of this guy seemed to invoke memories that paralyzed him. Slowly, Sakusa reached out to take his hand. Atsumu flinched briefly as his fingers coasted over his skin, but intertwined his fingers regardless and nodded slowly. He was my boyfriend. Before you. He saw how much it cost the setter to say the words, and squeezed his hand reassuringly. Sakusa felt dread pooling in his stomach. It wasn't like he hadn't considered that before, but part of him had hoped their past had been that of a toxic friendship, or just an unlucky encounter. This made more sense, but he wished it wouldn't. He wasn't good to you. It was more of a statement than a question, but Atsumu answered regardless and shook his head. He was nice at the beginning. Very charming, and he said he cared so much that I was the most important thing in the world. Every word felt like acid dripping onto his skin. Atsumu was one of the most important things in the world. In his world. He should have cared about him. But Sakusa recognized this as what it was. Love bombing. A tactic used by abusers to rope in their victims. A honey trap. But then, it started with little things, like criticizing what I did, and then how I looked. He would get loud and demanding, and then apologize. But the apologies and good days became less frequent, and he made me feel like I was at fault for his behavior, that he had to punish me. His voice broke, and Sakusa couldn't bear it anymore. He gently tugged at Atsumu's hand to ask if it was okay, but instead of an answer, the setter pulled the blanket aside and snuggled up to him. Immediately, Sakusa pulled him into the embrace and soothingly wrapped over his arm. He said, after I caught him cheating the first time and refused to sleep with him, he said he had to cheat because of that, and his voice broke again, and he took a shaky breath before continuing. Atsumu got me up. I was too deep to say anything. He made me think it was normal, but Samu saw the bruises and saw red. Sakusa could imagine it. Even without spelling it out for him, he knew what this meant. Yoshida had crossed the line to physical violence. He felt the same anger he was sure had driven the younger Mia, spreading just under his skin. He held Atsumu tighter. I stayed with Samu, and soon out and after that. They helped me get a restraining order, but there wasn't much more we could do. He felt Atsumu struggling to keep his breathing even, and the dampness as he hit his face against his chest and cried. I'm so sorry, Atsumu, that he did that to you. You didn't deserve that. All he got in response was a sob, and it clawed at his heart. Atsumu was his sunshine, his daylight and beacon. How could anyone ever wish to diminish his light? He was gorgeous when he shone the brightest. It was painful seeing him hurt. It will never hurt you like that. I know these memories won't vanish from one day to another, but I'll be here. You just tell me what you need. He nodded weakly against his chest. Do you love me? He sounded so broken that it shattered something within Sakusa as he felt the first tear slip over his cheek. Yes. Atsumu, I love you more than words can tell. The last 3 months, almost 4, of finally showing it openly have been the best of my life. I didn't think I was capable of a love like this, let alone a relationship like this, even if I wanted it. But you proved me wrong, and I'll love and worship you to the end of time if you wish so. Atsumu only cried harder, but before Sakusa had the chance to panic, the blonde hugged him tighter, soothing himself with deliberate, slow, yet shaky breaths. I love you too. You're more than I deserve. Sakusa shook his head, now on the edge of breaking as well. How could Atsumu think such a thing? No, Atsumu. If at all, I don't deserve you. I've been cold to you and in denial, but you are kind, passionate, loving. You care so much, and I'm grateful you care about me. You deserve everything the world has to offer, and I'll give you everything that's in my power to give if you ask. I should have told you from the start that about everything, that I was broken. It wasn't fair to you. You looked so hurt the other day when I stormed out. The words of defiance, the rejection of Atsumu's statement already assembled on his tongue, only held back by his tightly sealed lips as he let him finish and thought about it. He didn't blame him, but Sakusa needed to choose his words carefully. Be honest. I was hurt. I was hurt because I could see that you were. I was terrified because I saw the horror in her eyes, and I was mortified at the thought that I invoked it. You didn't. I did. Unknowingly. But I did. And maybe that alleviates my guilt in that matter, but I don't care who or even if there is someone to blame. I hurt you, knowingly or not, and I never wanted to do that. He took a deep breath. I can't undo it, but I need to acknowledge it so that it won't happen again. And I need you to acknowledge it as well. Even if you see no reason to blame me, I need you to hold me accountable should I ever make a mistake like that again. Can you do that for me? Tell me when my words or actions hurt you, even if it's accidental. Atsumu gulped, visibly overwhelmed by his request, but nodded. He looked up at him through tear-clouded amber, a golden ocean full of devotion and pain. It was the first time Sakusa saw his heart reflected so raw on his face, unguarded and open. As to whether you should have told me, no, it's not that you should have. Would have been good to know, but I get it. It took me a very long time to open up about virtually anything in this. This is so much more personal than what my favorite color is or what tea I like best. Atsumu chuckled a little. Yeah, we're real secretive, aren't we? Yeah, but you figured me out regardless. So did you. Sakusa looked at him questioningly. When I returned from Samu's, I was scared. I thought maybe we hadn't been together long enough with such a burden. Maybe we were still in the experimental phase, and you'd decide it wasn't worth it. Atsumu. He wanted to say something to reassure him, but Atsumu wasn't wrong after all. 4 months wasn't the world. It was the blink of an eye in the overall scheme of things. That he felt already so tethered to this setter wasn't something he had expected himself. But then, I grabbed my favorite mug and my favorite tea. I just knew. You're such a strict person when it comes to your routines, but somehow you just included me like it was nothing, like it was easy, and I knew we'd be alright. Surprised, the ace met his gaze again, now filled with warmth. He felt the same, more so perhaps. He was equally confused by how seamlessly their lives had intertwined, and even more that it didn't bother him at all. It was easy. Nothing in my life has ever been, but loving you, Miya Atsumu, was the easiest thing I ever did. Atsumu's eyes glassed over again, and so did Sakusa's. He sniffled while wiping at his face. You sure were in a lot of denial for that. Sakusa chuckled softly, sitting up and pulling Atsumu along with him. Perhaps it was too easy. It scared me. I never felt like this before. He leaned forward, an invitation that Atsumu swiftly accepted as he sealed their lips together. It was bittersweet, between tears of pain and tears of relief. When they separated, Atsumu looked down again. His fingers that had buried themselves into Sakusa's shirt started to tremble. Thank you. He made it seem like loving me was a chore. Like it was unlovable, and he was doing me a favor. You're not. It is not a chore. You are so loved. Not just by me, or Samu, or Suna, or your ma. The team loves you. Your fans love you even though they can be obnoxious. They might not know you as well as I do or as Samu does, but we do, and we are still here. I won't leave, and I don't love you any less now than I did before. Atsumu's bottom lip trembled, and he looked like he wanted to thank him again, so Sakusa silenced him with another bittersweet kiss, and just held him as the seconds ticked by. Thank you. He acknowledged it with a hum, half wanting to intervene again that he shouldn't thank him for something that came naturally to him. Loving Atsumu was easy, and he hated that someone made him feel as though this love was conditional in all the wrong ways. But he kept silent for now. It had been enough for today. They were exhausted. I wanted to show you like so much again when Motoya was here, and then again the next day. Why? He was too perplexed to even be offended that he wasn't there. I missed you, and it reminded me of you. I get it now, by the way. That confession scene was pretty heart-wrenching. I even cried once.
Huh? Ami, how dare you finally understand when I'm not there?
There it was. Atsumu pouted and looked at him accusingly, and Sakusa couldn't help but laugh, as his lips stretched into a soft smile afterwards. He missed this. I'm sorry, my love. We can watch it again if you like. Pink dusted the setter's cheeks as he was regarded softly with a warm gaze and a gentle touch against his face, where Sakusa wiped away the tear tracks that had been left on his skin. No, it won't be the same. Besides, what am I gonna do with all your rude comments? They're not rude. I'm trying to understand. They are, and you know it. But I like it. Grumpy's kinda part of your personality. You're just like that. Sakusa rolled his eyes and Atsumu grinned. And here I was trying to be more romantic. Isn't that what you always wanted from me? I'm just teasing you, Ami. He whined when suddenly his expression softened again. I know that I require a lot of attention and reassurance, and that must get annoying sometimes. It's not. He stopped himself as Atsumu continued. But I love you, Kiyomi. The way you are, and not some idea of you. I don't want you to change. Some more romantic gestures would be nice, but don't pretend you're someone you're not. Alright, I hear you. Don't worry, beloved. He could feel his own face heat up, not just at the nickname, but also because, without his consent, his mind was playing Atsumu saying his full name on repeat in his head. He got stuck on it like a broken record. It sounded forbiddenly good coming from him, loving and affectionate. By the way, have you noticed something odd between your cousin and Suna? Yeah, they've been texting a lot more than usual. Almost grateful for the distraction, Sakusa immediately accepted the change of topic. When Motia told me you were at your brother's place, he didn't want to tell me how he knew that and blushed. You don't think Suna is cheating on Atsumu, do you? If he does, he's doing an awful job at hiding it, considering he's been showing him the text messages. At least, I'm assuming those were the ones between Komari and him. They acted all weird about it, and didn't want to show me either. Odd. It left them thinking, but even after speculating for the next couple of hours until exhaustion finally took a hold of them completely, they didn't come to a logical conclusion, which was frustrating to say the least. Half asleep, Atsumu made plans to kidnap his brother and interrogate him, to which Sakusa added he had duct tape stored next to the cleaning supplies. And so the plan took shape. Apparently, they would kidnap Atsumu's brother and interrogate him or extort Suna and Komori for information as ransom. They fell asleep in each other's arms. The tension fell off them in the early hours of dawn, and they slept through the entire morning as their love was illuminated by the light of a new day. The lock clicked and Atsumu pushed the door open with his shoulder, while fumbling to put his key away again.
He cursed as he tried to balance the onigiri in one hand while trying to take off his jacket and shoes with the other. There was a subtle tension in his body as he took in the genkan and hallway behind it. His brother had texted him half an hour ago, a few minutes before he closed the restaurant, to ask him if he could bring over some leftover food this evening. He easily agreed and made a fresh batch, not that he'd tell him. Yet, in the light of the recent events and the striking similarity to about 2 weeks ago when he came over to check up on him, it was still unnerving to the chef. Atsumu? He called out to him as he stepped into the apartment. In the living room he was greeted by Sakusa, much to his surprise, until he heard the lock of the door once more. When he turned around he saw his twin, blocking his exit. Skeptically he raised an eyebrow, putting the relief to seem safe and sound aside. "I brought your food," he offered, but the blonde just narrowed his eyes. With a sigh, Sakusa got up and placed it on the dinner table. Atsumu observed the spectacle with growing intrigue while trying to look indifferent. "What is going on?" "I should ask you that." Even more confused, he looked at his twin again, looking more irritated by the second. Food delivery?" "Actually, it's an interrogation." He arched an eyebrow, unimpressed. "Or kidnapping. Pick your poison." His head snapped back around to Sakusa, who leaned against the table, seemingly indifferent, and yet Atsumu dared say, in his eyes glinted the hint of curiosity. "You're in on this?" He nodded. "And you're helping him?" He nodded again, much to Atsumu's surprise. A small smile played around the ace's lips. "I have to be a good boyfriend for him, don't I?" Atsumu's eyes narrowed and he let out a huff. "Not the point. You're not going anywhere until you tell me what's going on." "About what, idiot?" His brother had done many foolish things in his life, but this was one of these rare instances Atsumu thought he might have hit his head too hard a couple of times. Was he high? What in the world could the setter be talking about? "You and Komori, or rather, Rin and Komori. Don't tell me you haven't noticed." For a moment, there was something like nervousness in his eyes, and Atsumu sighed, cursing internally. And here he thought his brother would be too dense to actually notice. He was enough of an idiot, though, to completely misinterpret his silence. He's not cheating on you, is he?" "No. Gods, no. Lin would never. You should shut up if you have no idea what you're talking about." That was kind of a sore spot for him after his first girlfriend in high school cheated, and Atsumu knew. Which was probably why, just for a moment, flames of anger had ignited in his gaze, but they quickly dissipated as Atsumu denied it. But there is something between him and Lin. It wasn't a question, and Atsumu sighed again. "And this is your business. How?" "Yeah, my brother. Of course it's my business." A little quieter, he added. "I don't want you to get hurt." The silverhead was about to reply with a snide remark, but stopped at that. He felt oddly touched and slightly amused as he watched his twin now fumbling with his hands. Atsumu might be the younger one, but he had always protected his reckless and overly ambitious brother. It felt good to know that Atsumu was more than willing to return the favor, and yet he never wanted that of him. Never again. Also, Motiya's my cousin, if that counts for anything. He rolled his eyes, but nodded slowly. Fine. You are absolutely insufferable. You know that, Atsumu, right? Hey! He ignored his twin's protest and sat down at the table, reaching for the food. I'm not gonna let the food get cold just because you're an idiot. We can discuss it over dinner.
What's there to discuss?
Sakusa frowned but followed Asumu's example, as did Atsumu as he sat down and stared at him expectantly.
Nothing, really. As I said, it's not really a business, but I presume you might have questions. And if I'm gonna tell you, then not without explaining it properly and letting you draw dumbest conclusions like before.
The blonde huffed, but crossed his arms and waited.
Yeah, Lynn and Motoya are dating. They never did anything behind my back, I always knew, so it was never cheating. In fact, it'd be really hard for them to cheat with each other, considering that, well, it's true that Lynn and I are still dating too, Motoya and I are dating as well.
His brother looked at him puzzled. Now you lost me.
It's called polyamory, dumbass. Having only one partner might be more well known, but it's by no means the only possibility.
So, you're dating both?
Hmm.
And Motoya is dating both of you?
Yep.
Jeez. And here I thought your cousin had better taste. He turned to Sakusa, who so far hadn't commented or even given an indication how he felt about it.
Shady taste seems to run in the family, considering he's dating you.
Before the twins could argue again, the ace intervened.
Is he happy? Motoya, is my cousin happy in this arrangement?
Atsumu paused. He and Sakusa never really clicked and only bonded over the shared protectiveness of Atsumu, but now he saw that same vulnerability he felt for his brother in the ace's eyes and understood.
He nodded. I think so. I love seeing him with Ren. He makes him smile. I want Motoya to be happy more than anything.
Sakusa nodded slowly, lowering his gaze.
He is good at hiding behind a smile. Only lowers his guard when no one is looking. He thinks no one sees when he's hurting, and he can't really accept the help when someone does. I know. He did. As happy as he was with what they had now, the story of how they found each other wasn't the fairy tale it should have been. We'll take care of him. Good.
Wait, so why didn't you tell us?
You didn't tell me about Sakusa either.
That was different, and you know it.
Atsumu just shrugged his shoulders.
For how long?
Atsumu.
For how long?
He bit his tongue, well aware that this was long overdue. 6 months.
6 months? You kept it from me for half a year?
Look, I'm sorry, okay? I mean it. We just didn't know how to tell you. It didn't help that you were secretly dating. Motoya knew.
At that, Asuma raised an eyebrow before narrowing his eyes again.
Of course you don't. Lin knew, Toya knew. I'm the only one in the dark, as usual.
Sucks, huh?
Atsumu stared at him. His arms remained crossed, and Atsumu actually felt bad. He knew he should have done better. Yeah. I'm sorry, Atsumu.
The setter's gaze involuntarily softened and turned almost pleading. Then why?
I don't know. I guess I was scared it could change things between us.
Why? I don't care. It's not like I didn't date a bunch of different people before.
I know, but that's different. People are used to gay people now, but polyamory is still... It's not nice, what some say.
Atsumu's gaze darkened and he narrowed his eyes.
Who? No one. At least, no one important. just strangers. I knew you wouldn't, but I guess I was a bit of a coward. All of us.
Atsumu sighed and got up. For a moment Atsumu thought he might leave, but then he was pulled into a bone-crushing hug. Literally, a little more and something would break. He could feel that the setter was still angry with him, but there was comfort and familiarity in the touch. Reassurance. You're the idiot. I don't care. And I never would, as long as you're happy and not a serial killer or something. Maybe even then. Atsumu let out a choked laugh and pulled his brother closer.
Same here, dumbass.
Great. Now, when you go home, tell Lin I expect an apology for keeping this secret.
He was only having my back.
I don't care. He's my best friend. It's his duty.
Atsumu rolled his eyes again. Before he left, he turned to Sakusa once more. Same goes for Toya. I'm sure he would have told you sooner if not for me. The ace nodded briskly, but offered something like a smile as he left. Perhaps now everything would be okay again.
Thank you so much for watching to the end. I really appreciate it. Especially for such a long video. It really helps my channel out so much. As would it if you were to subscribe and leave a like. I would really appreciate it. And also, in return, you wouldn't miss any of my future content. So, I think that's a great deal. On top of that, tell me under the pinned comment what your favorite part and your favorite quote of this series was. Specifically for the bonus part, did you like it? And a special thanks as always goes out to my nerdy neckos, you all. I appreciate you so much. You support this channel so much. If you are not a nerdy neko yet but want to become one, click on the join button under this video and check out the perks you get with it, like early access. On top of that, tell me if you have any requests and ideas in the request form. Link is in the description. And here are more videos. Check them out if you like. And now I hope you have a wonderful and amazing day. Bye everyone!
Step 4, everybody just do your thing. Wake up, today's gonna be a good day. Wake up, today's gonna be a good day. Wake up.